Beyond the gate's spoilers tease that Devon Winter's arrival in the cloistered, sun-kissed enclave of Fairmont Crest was less an introduction than a ripple through still-what-era disturbance that would eventually grow into a wave. Those who lived inside the high-walled community were accustomed to their routines, their discreet dealings, and the unwritten rules of a social order built over decades. Outsiders rarely breached those gates without a clear purpose, and those who did seldom carried the quiet confidence Devon brought with him. His reputation, already cemented in the world beyond as a shrewd businessman with an ear for music and a heart shaped by personal tragedy, preceded him. For Devon, stepping into Fairmont Crest wasn't a matter of curiosity, it was an intersection of past and present. The connection he shared with the Dupree family ran deeper than polite acquaintance. It was tethered to the memory of his late adoptive father, Neil Winters, whose mentorship and legacy still echoed in Devon's life. Neil had often spoken of Vernon Dupree, the patriarch of the Crest's most influential family, with a blend of respect and guarded admiration. To meet Vernon in this rarefied setting was, in some ways, to step into one of Neil's stories and perhaps rewrite the ending. The Fairmont Crest Club stood as the community's crown jewel. Marble columns, polished to a gleam, flanked the wide front steps, and manicured gardens hinted at the wealth and meticulous planning that defined the place. Inside, the atmosphere balanced understated elegance with an air of exclusivity. Here, deals were whispered over vintage wine, friendships were brokered in the shade of secrecy, and music always live, always exceptional was more than entertainment, it was currency. Anita Dupree, Vernon's wife, embodied the very soul of that music. Once the magnetic frontwoman of the Articulates, she'd commanded stages with a voice that carried both velvet warmth and steel resolve. Time had not dulled her, if anything, it had refined her presence into something rarer. When Devon entered the club that afternoon, Anita was at the center of a small gathering, laughter rippling through her circle like a familiar refrain. The introduction was warm, almost familial. Vernon clasped Devon's hand with a firm shake, but it was Anita's gaze sharp, appraising, yet not unkind that seemed to take his measure. Devon didn't waste time. After the initial pleasantries, he outlined the reason for his visit. The reunion concert Anita had recently headlined had struck a chord in him, both personally and professionally. Watching it, he'd felt the same thrill he experienced when first discovering the transformative power of music. His proposal was bold. He wanted to live-stream a follow-up performance, not merely as an event, but as a landmark production for his jazz label. More than that, he insisted Anita retain full creative control, positioning her not just as a performer, but as a co-producer and partner in the venture. It was the kind of offer few artists could refuse, financially sound, creatively liberating, and packaged with Devon's proven track record of success. Anita listened, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her tone was thoughtful but firm. Family, she explained, had to come first. Her commitments here, to Vernon, to their daughter Dani, and to the broader circle of the Articulates, couldn't be compromised for any project, no matter how appealing. She countered with an alternative. Devon should approach the other members of the group, perhaps assemble a separate performance under their banner. She would lend her blessing, but not her direct involvement. Devon paused, weighing her words. It wasn't rejection in the cold sense. Rather, it was a gate partially closed, with the hint it might open later under different circumstances. He agreed to her suggestion, masking any disappointment with the composure of a man accustomed to negotiations. Outwardly, everything was cordial. Inwardly, he recognized the subtle challenge Anita had laid before him. If he could win over the others, perhaps the path back to her would appear on its own. As the day wore on, Devon wandered through the club's corridors, each lined with photographs and memorabilia chronicling decades of performances and high society events. That was when he encountered Dani Dupree. The resemblance to her mother was striking not just in features, but in the quiet self-possession she carried. Yet there was something guarded in her eyes, a shadow that spoke of unresolved chapters. Their conversation began lightly, the way two people might trade pleasantries at a charity gala. But as soon as Devon mentioned Neil, Danny's demeanor softened. She had known him, in the way children know the close friends of their parent fondly, at a respectful distance, but with the awareness of his importance. From there, the discussion turned to music, to shared memories of performances they'd both attended, to the subtle shifts in the industry Devon had witnessed firsthand. It was only later, when the subject drifted toward Danny's personal life, that the unspoken weight between them began to take form. She spoke, almost absently, of Bill, her ex-husband. There was no bitterness in her tone, but the absence of bitterness can sometimes reveal more than its presence. Bill, it seemed, still occupied a space in her thoughts, if not in her daily life. Devon, listening carefully, caught the undertone of unfinished business. To the outside observer, Devon's arrival might have seemed coincidental, a friendly visit layered with a business proposition. But beneath the surface, there was more. He admitted, in a moment of quiet candor, that he had reached out to the Duprees only after witnessing Anita's reunion concert. Something in that performance, something beyond technical brilliance, had reignited a creative hunger in him. He wanted to be part of whatever came next for Anita, the Articulates, and by extension, the family itself. This confession, shared in confidence with Danny, hinted at deeper currents. There was speculation among viewers and, it seemed, among some character that Devon and Bill might share a familial tie, perhaps as cousins or members of a generation linked by blood and history. Devon neither confirmed nor denied such theories outright, but his steady gaze when the subject arose suggested he wasn't entirely dismissing the possibility. The night that followed their meeting was thick with the kind of atmosphere Fairmont Crest was known for, candlelight casting warm shadows across the club's interior, the soft clink of crystal glasses, the low murmur of conversations too discreet for strangers to overhear. Devon sat at a corner table, watching Anita from a distance as she engaged with her guests. Every so often, their eyes met, and in those fleeting glances was a conversation yet to be spoken, a mutual recognition of opportunity, risk, and the history that bound them. The next day, Devon began reaching out to the other members of the Articulates. Each meeting brought its own challenges. Some were eager at the prospect of revitalizing their brand, others wary of reopening old dynamics. Devon navigated these discussions with the same finesse that had carried him through countless industry negotiations, but the stakes felt different here. This wasn't just about music, it was about embedding himself in a network where personal loyalty outweighed contracts and where every agreement was as much a social alliance as it was a business deal. Meanwhile, Danny found herself drawn back into Devon's orbit. There was an ease to their conversations, even when they strayed into territory she'd normally avoid. Bill's name came up more often than she expected, and while she told herself it was harmless curiosity on Devon's part, there was a sharpness to his questions that suggested he was mapping a larger puzzle. The possibility of Bill re-entering the picture lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Devon, for all his tact, seemed almost to welcome the idea, as though confrontation might bring clarity to the vague family connections hinted at but never confirmed. If Bill was indeed linked to him by blood, the implications would reach far beyond personal drama. They would touch on inheritance, legacy, and the unspoken hierarchies that governed both Fairmont Crest and Devon's own world. As days turned into weeks, the air within the community thickened with speculation. Why had Devon truly come? Was it only about the music, or was the music a bridge to something more personal, perhaps even territorial? Anita's polite distance only fueled the questions, especially as she continued to occupy the center of attention without committing to Devon's proposal. Vernon, for his part, observed quietly, his approval neither given nor withheld, as though testing Devon's resilience. And yet, the most potent moments came not in the formal meetings or social gatherings, but in the quiet, unguarded exchanges. A shared laugh with Danny over an old photograph. A lingering handshake with one of the Articulates after a successful rehearsal. The way Anita's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, when Devon praised her artistry without attaching any strings. These small currents were shaping something larger, even if none of them could yet see the full outline. In the background, Whispers persisted about the so-called secret Devon was holding, a piece of knowledge or an intention that might shift the balance between the Duprees and himself. His own account of it was deceptively simple, that Anita's reunion concert had awakened in him the certainty of a new project, one that could stand as a defining moment for his label. But some suspected there was more, perhaps tied to Bill, perhaps to some long-buried connection between the Winters and Dupree families. If Devon noticed the speculation, he didn't show it. Instead, he pressed forward, each step calculated, each interaction another thread in the web he was weaving. The deeper he moved into Fairmont Crest's world, the clearer it became that music was only part of the melody. The harmony and the dissonance would come from the tangled interplay of love, loyalty, and ambition. The turning point came quietly, without the spectacle that usually accompanied drama in Fairmont Crest. Danny was the first to sense a shift in the tone of conversations, the weight of certain glances, the way Vernon seemed more watchful than usual. Devon's meetings with the remaining members of the Articulates were going better than expected. Each agreement he secured tightened his connection to the group, and by extension, to Anita. But progress brought its own complications. One afternoon, Danny found herself in the music room of the Dupree estate, leafing through old sheet music. The door creaked open and Devon stepped in, his presence filling the space with the same mix of warmth and calculation she had come to recognize. He asked her opinion on a track arrangement, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was weighing more than just chord progressions. Danny confronted him, half in jest, about the circulating rumors that linked him to Bill by blood. Devon's response was a measured pause, followed by a question of his own. What would it mean to her if it were true? The question hung in the air, charged and unsettling. Danny avoided a direct answer, but the look she gave him said enough. The possibility was not something she could easily dismiss. Meanwhile, Anita was facing her own set of pressures. The more the Articulates entertained Devon's offers, the more she found herself drawn into the orbit she had initially tried to sidestep. Vernon, ever the strategist, advised caution. He recognized the business sense in Devon's approach, but he also knew that partnerships in their world were rarely just about the work. Devon's charm, his history with Neil, and the whispers of family ties with Bill made him both an asset and a potential disruption. Bill's eventual arrival shattered the fragile equilibrium. He came to Fairmont Crest unannounced, his presence carrying the charged energy of unfinished arguments and unsettled debts. Danny's reaction was complex, part nostalgia, part caution. Devon's, however, was sharper. Their first meeting was a study in controlled civility, each man assessing the other as if trying to read an unfamiliar piece of music. Bill, never one to avoid the direct route, asked Devon outright if the rumors were true. The room seemed to shrink in that moment, Anita's gaze flicking between them, Danny's hands tightening around her glass. Devon didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he shifted the conversation to the reunion project, framing it as an opportunity for all of them to contribute to something lasting. The weeks that followed were a tangle of alliances and shifting loyalties. Danny, caught between the gravitational pull of her past with Bill and the intrigue of Devon's presence, found herself drawn into rehearsals and planning sessions more than she intended. Anita, too, became increasingly involved, if only to ensure the integrity of the music and the group's image. Devon and Bill's interactions became a subplot in themselves. In public, they were polite, even collaborative at times. In private, their conversations carried an edge, discussions about creative direction bleeding into subtle challenges about trust and territory. Bill questioned Devon's intentions with Danny, while Devon countered by hinting at the possibilities of a family bond they had yet to explore. Tensions reached a peak during a late-night strategy meeting at the club. Devon presented a revised production plan for the livestream, one that expanded the scope beyond what Anita had originally envisioned. It included archival footage, behind-the-scenes moments, and a narrative thread tying the Articulates' legacy to the present day. Anita saw the brilliance in it, but also the risk it would place their family's history under a public microscope. Bill voiced his objections immediately, framing them as concerns for privacy, though everyone in the room sensed the personal undercurrent. Devon countered with the argument that the authenticity of their story was what would make the project resonate. Danny, torn between them, suggested a compromise. They could control which parts of the history were shown, curating the narrative without losing its heart. The compromise was accepted for the moment, but the undercurrents remained. Devon, privately, began piecing together information that might confirm or disprove the rumored connection to Bill. Conversations with Anita yielded fragment mentions of past collaborations, old photographs, names that appeared in both family trees but were never openly discussed. One evening, Devon found himself alone in the club's archive room, poring over a collection of vintage programs and press clippings. A yellowed article caught his attention, a charity concert decades earlier featuring both Neil Winters and a young Vernon Dupree, with a lineup that included a musician sharing Bill's surname. The article was vague, but it was enough to keep Devon digging. At the same time, Bill seemed to be conducting his own investigation. He spoke with longtime residents of the Crest, people who had been around long enough to remember the early days of the Dupree's reign. Their accounts were inconsistent. Some hinted at a familial link, others dismissed it as gossip. But the uncertainty only added fuel to the fire. As rehearsals for the live stream intensified, so did the personal entanglements. Danny and Devon's rapport deepened, marked by moments of quiet understanding and shared ambition. Bill noticed, and while he kept his concerns largely to himself, the tension between the three of them was palpable. Anita, ever perceptive, began to suspect that whatever was unfolding between them could affect not just the project, but the cohesion of the family itself. The night before the final rehearsal, Devon made a choice. He invited Bill to meet him privately at the club after hours. The conversation that followed was stripped of pretense. Devon laid out his belief that they were connected, explaining the threads he had found and the significance of their potential bond. Bill listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Devon finished, Bill simply said that if it were true, it would change everything, but that truth, in their world, was rarely uncomplicated. The following day, the atmosphere in the rehearsal space was electric. The Articulates, united on stage, were delivering performances that blended nostalgia with a renewed sense of purpose. Cameras captured every note, every glance, every unspoken exchange. Behind the scenes, though, the unresolved question of Devon and Bill's connection hovered, influencing decisions in ways that no one wanted to admit. Danny, watching from the wings, realized that the project had become more than a production. It was a crucible testing loyalties, revealing hidden truths, and setting the stage for confrontations that could no longer be delayed. Anita, standing beside her, seemed to share the same thought. Whatever happened after the final curtain, Fairmont Crest would not be the same. The live stream itself unfolded flawlessly, drawing in audiences far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The music was transcendent, the production seamless. Yet for those within the Crest, the real drama was unfolding offstage. In the green room afterward, amid the congratulatory embraces and champagne toasts, Bill approached Devon with a look that spoke volumes. They stepped aside, out of earshot of the others. Bill told Devon that he had found a piece of information that might confirm their connection once and for all. But there was a condition. They would discuss it only when they were ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Devon agreed, though the agreement carried the weight of a promise neither man could fully predict the cost of keeping. As the night wound down, Danny caught Devon's eye from across the room. In her expression was a mixture of pride, relief, and a question she hadn't yet put into words. Anita, watching them both, knew that the performance had only been the beginning. The music might fade, but the reverberations of what had been set in motion would echo long after the final note. The gates of Fairmont Crest, once symbols of security and exclusivity, now seemed like the edges of a stage on which a new act was about to begin. Devon had entered with a proposition. He would leave with something far more complicated, a web of relationships, secrets, and possibilities that could either bind them together or tear them apart. And in the quiet moments between celebration and reflection, Everyone present understood that the answers they sought were as dangerous as they were necessary. The celebrations lingered well into the night, the club's polished floors alive with the shuffle of dancers and the low hum of satisfied guests. Yet in the spaces between the laughter and applause, tension remained a taut string waiting to be plucked. Devon stood near the balcony, the cool night air spilling in from the open French doors. He looked down at the gardens below, their pathways lit by soft lantern light, and thought about Bill's cryptic promise. Danny approached quietly, her dress brushing the floor as she moved to stand beside him. For a long moment, they simply watched the scene below, the glow of the party drifting outward into the stillness. Then she asked the question she had been holding back. If Bill was his family, what would it change? Devon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he told her that truth had a way of demanding action, and that sometimes it was the action, not the truth itself, that could tear people apart. Across the room, Anita and Vernon were in quiet conversation. Vernon's expression was unusually serious, and Anita kept glancing toward Devon. They had been here before situations where the personal and professional became hopelessly entangled, but this one felt different. Devon wasn't just another ambitious producer or opportunistic businessman. He was tied to their history, their daughter, and now, perhaps, to the man who had once been Danny's husband. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone, Bill found Devon again. This time, he was ready to talk. They left the club together, walking the winding paths through the crest until they reached a quiet bench beneath a sprawling oak. Bill spoke first. He had tracked down an old letter, one written decades earlier, from Neil Winters to Vernon Dupree. In it, Neil spoke of our shared bloodline and the responsibility that came with it. The wording was deliberately vague, but to Bill, it was confirmation. Neil had been family not just in spirit, but by blood. Devon read the letter in silence, the weight of the words settling over him. If Neil and Vernon shared a bloodline, then the web extended further than he'd imagined. Bill was part of it. Danny, by marriage, had been part of it too. The implications were enormous, not just for the relationships in the room, but for the legacy of the Dupree family and the Winters name. They agreed to keep the revelation private for now. Neither man was ready to unleash the chaos that would follow. But in their silence, they understood that the secret couldn't stay buried forever. Someone, perhaps Anita, perhaps Danny, would eventually demand answers. In the days that followed, the afterglow of the live stream began to fade, replaced by questions about what came next. Devon resumed talks with the Articulates about potential tours, while Anita weighed offers from other producers suddenly interested in capitalizing on their renewed fame. Danny kept her distance from both men, unsure of how to navigate the shifting ground beneath her feet. One evening, she found herself alone in the archive room, the same place Devon had once searched for clues. She stumbled upon the same yellowed article, then noticed something Devon hadn't seen before, a small handwritten note on the back, in Anita's script. It mentioned Neil by name, alongside a brief line, "We never told them." Maybe we never should. The discovery left Danny shaken. It wasn't just Devon and Bill's secret anymore. It was hers, too. She confronted Anita, who, after a long silence, admitted that there had been reasons for keeping the truth quiet, reasons tied to family politics, personal pride, and the fear of losing control over the narrative of their own lives. Danny didn't tell Devon immediately, but she watched him more closely after that, studying the way he interacted with Bill, the unspoken recognition in their eyes. The truth was becoming a shadow in every room they entered together. The confrontation came sooner than any of them expected. At a private dinner arranged by Vernon to discuss the future of the Articulates, Bill let slip a remark about keeping it in the family. Devon caught the flicker in Danny's expression, the way Anita's hand stilled on her wine glass. In that moment, the balance tipped. Devon asked, directly and without preamble, why no one had spoken openly about the connection. Anita's answer was simple but devastating, because once you name a bond, you can't unname it. And some bonds, she said, were better left undefined. The table fell silent. Danny looked from her mother to Devon, then to Bill, realizing that whatever happened next would set the course for all of them. Devon's voice was steady when he replied that families, whether chosen or inherited, were built on truth, and that hiding from it only weakened the foundation. Bill met his gaze, the tension between them replaced by something almost like solidarity. "Then maybe it's time we stop hiding," he said. The days after that dinner were a blur of decisions. The truth about the family connection spread quietly at first, confined to those within the crust. Some embraced it as a point of pride, others as a liability. For Devon, it became both a weight and a freedom, an anchor to the past and a key to the future. In the end, the reunion project stood not just as a triumph of music, but as the spark that brought buried truths into the light. Relationships shifted, alliances reformed, and the gates of Fairmont Crest felt a little less impenetrable. Devon left the community a few weeks later, but not for good. He promised Anita he would return, not as a guest, but as family. Danny walked him to the gates, their goodbye carrying the unspoken understanding that their story was far from over. Bill watched from a distance, the letter from Neil still in his possession, a reminder that some truths take years to fully reveal themselves. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of Fairmont Crest, the music played on, carrying with it the echoes of secrets finally given a voice.